The world outside was a silent, white beast. It had swallowed the fields, the forest paths, even the familiar gnarled oak that marked the boundary between old man Willem Strip and young Thomas. The wind, when it chose to speak, did so in a low, guttural moan through the chinks in the wattle and daub, pushing fingers of air so cold they felt like hot iron against exposed skin. Inside the single-room, smoke-blackened cottage, the world was reduced to a sphere of dim, flickering light, thick with the smells of wood smoke, damp wool, humanity, and the earthy, ever-present scent of the two cows, Brindle and Daisy, who stood patiently at the far end, their slow breaths adding a fog of their own. This was not a season. It was a siege. Winter, in the year of our Lord 1322, in the village of Wolford under the lordship of Sir Geoffrey de Clare, was a test of endurance that stretched from Martinmas in November to the uncertain thaw of Plough Monday, long after Easter. For the peasants bound to the land, survival was not a dramatic tale of heroism, but a slow, meticulous, and deeply communal dance with oblivion. And it began, paradoxically, in the blazing abundance of autumn. The last sheaf of rye, the harvest queen, had been cut with ceremony and ale. The Michaelmas rents, a fattened goose, 2 bushels of the best wheat and 3 pence, had been delivered to the steward, leaving a tightness in the chests of the villagers as they watched their surplus depart. But what remained was precious, calculated down to the grain. The loaves baked from the mixed grains of the harvest, rye, barley, peas, were not the fluffy, white bread of the Lord's table. This was massy, dense, dark, and chewy, designed to fill the belly and last. They were baked not weekly, but in a massive, days-long undertaking. Under Agnes's command, her daughters Marjorie and little Emoda mixed the dough in the great trough. The communal oven, a domed clay giant heated by a roaring fire of furs and hedge trimmings, glowed like a devil's eye. One by one, the families brought their shaped loaves. The heat was immense, the smell divine. These 50 loaves per household, once hardened, would become the bedrock of their diet. They hung from the rafters in nets, rock hard, to be shaved into chunks and soaked in broth or ale for months to come. The slaughter came with the first hard frost. It was a day of grim festivity and absolute necessity. Animals that could not be fed through the winter, the older sheep, the piglet that wouldn't thrive, the ox grown too old for the plow, were killed. Blood was caught in troughs, stirred vigorously to prevent clotting, and mixed with grain and herbs to make black puddings that were cooked and smoked. Nothing was wasted. Intestines became casings for sausages. Bladders were saved for storage. Hides were scraped and salted for the tanner. The meat itself was butchered with an eye not on roasts, but on preservation. Most was packed into barrels with coarse salt, a luxury purchased at the Michaelmas fair. Some was cut into thin strips and laid on the wicker frames high in the roof, above the central hearth, where the constant, acrid smoke from burning green wood and dung cakes would slowly transform it into tough, flavorful bacon. The true center of their winter universe, however, was not the hearth but the pot. The potage was an ever-evolving, never-emptied entity. Into the iron cauldron, slung on a hook over the fire, went everything: base of water and a knuckle of smoked bone, then the daily additions. A handful of dried, leathery peas or beans soaked overnight. A shaving of that rock-hard bread. A few shriveled carrots and turnips from the mound. A pit lined with straw and earth where the root vegetables were buried to save them from freezing. A handful of oats for thickness. Some wild garlic and thyme from the little bundle hanging by the door. On a good day, a piece of that salted pork, soaked to remove some of the brine, would be added, and the resulting stew would be a rich, fatty, salty marvel. The pot was always there, always bubbling, its contents replenished as they were consumed. It was heat, nourishment, and life itself. The cold was a physical adversary. The cottage, for all its efforts, was barely warmer than the outside. The family, Agnes, her husband John, their 3 children, and John's widowed father, old Henry, slept together in the one alcove, on a mattress stuffed with straw and dried fern. Their blankets were of coarse wool, heavy and often itchy with lice, but vital. Clothing was layered: a linen smock against the skin, then a woolen tunic or kirtle, then a hooded cloak or coat for the men, fastened with a simple wooden toggle. Feet were wrapped in strips of cloth puttees before being shoved into leather shoes clogged with wood to lift them above the mud and snow. But the true secret was in the small things. Hot stones from the fire's edge, wrapped in rags, were taken to bed. The cows at the other end of the room provided a surprising amount of animal heat. And the communal life meant bodies huddled together for shared warmth, day and night. For winter was not a time of idleness. This was a truth that would shock a modern mind. The field slept, but the people did not. The short days were filled with the work of maintenance and creation. John and the other men mended tools in the dim light, rehafting axes, sharpening plowshares with a foot-powered grindstone, weaving new baskets from willow withes gathered from the stream bank. Indoors, by the meager light of a rushlight, a reed soaked in animal fat, Agnes and the women spun wool. The constant whir-whir of the drop spindle was the soundtrack of winter. She carded the raw wool between two spiked boards, then drew it out, twisting it into a strong thread. This was women's wealth, the basis for the family's next set of clothes, their blankets, and perhaps even a surplus to barter. Old Henry, his fingers gnarled but clever, carved wooden spoons, repaired leather harnesses, and told stories, tales of the Green Man, of saints, of the great famine when he was a boy, a warning that hung over them all. The church was their spiritual and social bulwark. On Sundays and feast days, they would brave the cold to trudge to St. Mary. The stone church was as cold as a tomb, their breath rising in clouds as they knelt on the frozen dirt floor. But the Mass in Latin was a mystery that offered comfort, a promise of a warmer eternity. The priest, Father Anselm, spoke of Christ's birth at Christmas, a celebration they marked not with gifts, but with a special, slightly less watered-down ale and a sliver of fresh pork if the Lord was generous. More important were the minor saints, days that punctured the winter gloom. St. Lucy, St. Thomas the Apostle, each with its own small ritual, a reason to share a special oatcake or sing a particular song. But the darkness bred its own fears. When little Emota took sick with a feverish cough, Agnes didn't just rely on the potage. She hung a bag of wormwood and rue around the child's neck to ward off evil spirits. She made a poultice of honey and dried yarrow for her chest. Old Henry muttered about the marsh fever and blamed a malevolent spirit from the nearby fen. They sent for the wise woman, old Mag, who lived at the forest's edge. She came, smelling of earth and strange herbs, and gave Emota a tea of willow bark, though she called it by another name. The line between medicine, superstition, and faith was invisible to them. It was all part of the fabric of survival. The greatest threat was not the cold or sickness, but the creeping specter of hunger. The hungry gap loomed in late winter, long before any new green shoots appeared. The stores of grain dwindled. The salted meat grew rancid or was consumed. The potage grew thinner, dominated by bitter field beans and water. It was then that the communal bonds were tested and reinforced. Kinship and neighborly obligation were not virtues but survival mechanisms. A death in the family meant an extra mouth gone, but also two fewer hands to work. A birth in winter was perilous but a promise for the future. Villagers shared what they could. A piece of news from a peddler, that the price of wool was rising in the town 2 days' walk away, could spark a desperate plan. John and 2 other men might bundle together their scant surplus of spun wool and make the treacherous journey to market, trading for an extra bag of grain or a precious lump of salt. One such journey in the depths of February would change everything for John and Agnes. The snow had crusted over, making walking possible but dangerous. John, along with his brother Martin and their neighbor, the hulking blacksmith's son called Tomkin, set out with their wool packs on their backs. They followed the river, its ice groaning and cracking like a living thing. The world was a monochrome of white and gray. The silence so profound it rang in their ears. On the second day, as they skirted the edge of the vast royal forest, they heard a sound that froze their blood, the distant, musical baying of hounds. Not the village dogs, but the deep, trained voices of a noble hunt. They pressed themselves against the trunks of great oaks as the party thundered past, First the sleek, loping greyhounds, then the outriders in bright colors, and finally the Lord himself, a flash of scarlet and fur on a massive destrier. The Lord's hawk, hooded and restless, was a clenched fist of feathers on his glove. They were a vision from another planet, a burst of heat and noise and violent color in the frozen world. The peasants bowed their heads, not in respect, but in the hope of invisibility. But the hunt went wrong. A boar, cornered and furious, charged from a thicket. The Lord's horse reared. There was a shout, a crash, and then the terrible squeal of the boar and the scream of a horse. Then sudden silence. The outriders galloped toward the commotion. John, Martin, and Tompkin waited, terrified, knowing that to stumble upon a nobleman's accident could mean death on suspicion of poaching or worse. Yet a slow curiosity and a desperate, opportunistic hope drew them forward. In a clearing they saw it. The boar was dead, a lance through its neck. The Lord's horse was struggling with a broken leg, its eyes rolling white. And the Lord himself, Sir Geoffrey's own younger brother, was sprawled, unconscious, a gash on his forehead staining the snow crimson. The outriders were arguing, one holding the screaming horse, another kneeling by the Lord. They were miles from any aid. It was Tompkin, with his blacksmith strength, who acted. He stepped into the clearing. "We can help," he grunted, his voice startling the men. The outriders drew swords, but the desperation in their eyes was clear. John, who had a way with animals, went to the injured horse. He spoke to it softly, his hand on its neck, and with a look of profound sorrow he took the knife from his belt. The outriders nodded, understanding the grim necessity. With a swift, merciful movement, John ended the horse's suffering. Meanwhile Martin, the most nimble-fingered, used a strip of clean linen from their pack to bind the Lord's head wound. They fashioned a litter from cloaks and strong saplings. For 2 hours, they hauled the unconscious noble through the snow back toward Wolford Manor, the outriders leading the way. They arrived as the short winter day was failing, a procession of mud, blood, and exhaustion. The steward, a grim man named Fulk, took one look and barked orders. The Lord was carried to the manor house. The peasants were left standing in the courtyard, shivering, unsure of their fate. They were given no thanks but also no punishment. A tacit understanding hung in the air. As they turned to leave, the kitchen door opened, and a servant, under the stern eye of the cook, handed them a sack. Inside was a quarter of the boar, a sack of coarse white flour, not their dark maslin but the Lord's own wheat, and a small hard cheese. It was a fortune. They returned to the village not as heroes but as providers. The meat, rich and fatty, was shared out among the 3 families and then, in smaller portions, with others who had kin in need. The flour was used not for daily bread but for special, risen loaves on the Feast of Candlemas, a taste of heaven itself. The cheese was parceled out in precious slivers over weeks. Their act had not broken the winter's siege, but it had reinforced the walls. The days began to lengthen, imperceptibly at first. The quality of the light changed, from a dull gray to a pale, watery gold. One morning old Henry pointed to the hedge where a single, fat robin was singing. "He smells the thaw," the old man croaked. The great pot was now mostly water and herbs, the last scraps of salt pork long gone. But hope, like a fragile green shoot, was pushing through the hard soil of their endurance. Then came the sound that was sweeter than any church bell, the drip, drip, drip of melting snow from the thatch. A warm wind blew in from the south, carrying the scent of wet earth. The stream, so long locked in ice, groaned and then roared to life, running brown and furious. The Hungry Gap was at its most desperate, but its end was in sight. On the day the first green tip of a snowdrop pushed through the black earth in the lee of the church wall, Agnes gathered her family. They were thin, their faces pinched, their clothes hanging looser. But their eyes were clear. They had survived, not through a single epic battle, but through 1,000 small, careful, communal acts. The stored grain, the smoked meat, the never-empty pot, the spun wool, the shared stories, the bartered aid, the mercy shown to a stranger in the forest. Winter had been the great leveler, the white beast. But as the peasants of Wolford emerged from their cottages, blinking in the strengthening sun, they began the slow, muddy, glorious work of spring. The wheel of the year had turned. They had endured. And in that endurance, in the profound, unspoken knowledge carried in their bones and passed on in their stories, was a victory far greater than any won on a battlefield. It was the quiet, astonishing triumph of the ordinary. The thaw was a treacherous ally. What had been a landscape locked in silent, solid white became a churning, sucking sea of mud. The track to the fields, the path to the church, the very ground outside each cottage door dissolved into a clinging, cold mire that stole shoes and sapped strength. The dripping thatch sagged, threatening leaks. The air inside the cottage, once kept at a stable chill, now grew damp and bone-numbing. Old Henry's cough, which had retreated to a winter rattle, came back with a vengeance, a wet, deep sound that kept them all awake. But the sun held its strength a little longer each day, and with the softening earth came the voice of authority. The manor court was convened. All the villeins and freemen of Wolford gathered in the muddy yard before the steward Fulk. He stood on the stone steps of the manor house, a wax tablet in his hand, his eyes missing nothing. This was the reckoning, not just for the year past, but for the year to come. Rents in labor were announced for the spring sowing. 3 days a week, John and every other able-bodied tenant would owe work on the Lord's demesne lands, plowing the heavy furlongs with the manor's great ox teams, sowing the Lord's precious wheat seed. Their own strips in the scattered, communal fields would have to be worked on saints' days and in the aching hours of dusk. Disputes were settled. A boundary marker moved by frost, a pig accused of rooting in a neighbor's garden leavings. A fine was levied for brewing ale without the Lord's license. The rhythms of obligation and surveillance reasserted themselves, the familiar yoke settling back onto their shoulders. Yet there was a subtle shift, a current in the air as palpable as the spring wind. When folks gazed past over John, Martin, and Tomkin, it lingered not with suspicion, but with a cold, calculating recognition. No word of thanks for the boar hunt rescue was ever uttered. To thank a peasant for such a thing was unthinkable, a disruption of the divine order. But the absence of expected harshness was a message in itself. When the allocations of seed grain from the manor's store were handed out, John found his measure to be a handful more than his strip's strict entitlement. The steward said nothing, merely moved his rod down the list. It was not generosity, it was an investment. Healthy, marginally less desperate peasants were more productive peasants. The incident in the forest had, for a fleeting moment, made them visible as men, not just units of labor. It was a dangerous visibility, but one that had, this time, yielded a sliver of advantage. The real work began with the body. After months of huddling, of confined, smoky air and thin potage, their bodies were weak. The first day of serious labor, hauling manure from the midden to spread on the fields, left them groaning and muscle-shaken. Hands soft from winter spinning tore on rough plow handles. But there was a fierce joy in it, too. To be outside, to feel the sun, however feeble, on the back of the neck, to smell the earth instead of the close air of the cottage, was a profound physical relief. The children, Emoda now recovered and chasing the first bold chicks, ran with a frantic energy they had not possessed in months. Agnes's world shifted from the hearth to the garden plot, the toft behind the cottage. Here, in the carefully tended soil, she planted the seeds saved from last year's harvest: onions, leeks, cabbages, and peas. This was her domain, the source of the vital flavors and vitamins that would supplement the grains. She planted woad for dye and flax for linen, her fingers working the dark earth with a tender urgency. The rhythm of her days was now set by the light and the needs of growing things. In the forest's edge, where the trees were just hinting at a green mist of buds, the villagers exercised their common rites, a delicate dance with the Lord's law. They collected firewood, only the lop and top, dead fallen branches, never touching a living tree trunk, which was strictly for the Lord's use. Children gathered tender nettles and wild garlic for the pot. The men, in secret, nervous forays, checked their snares for rabbits or a foolish pigeon. Poaching was a hanging offense, but a rabbit could mean the difference between resilience and decline for a family. The memory of the boar's meat, a taste of wild, forbidden abundance, was sharp on their tongues. Then a new tension arrived on horseback. It was not the lord or his steward, but a monk from the Abbey of St. Albans, a lean man with intelligent eyes and ink-stained fingers. He was conducting a survey, he said, for the Abbey's records. He asked questions, not about rents or labor, but about the land itself. How many acres in the common field? How did they rotate the crops? What yield did they get from a bushel of rye seed after a good summer? His interest was academic, dispassionate, yet deeply unsettling. It felt as though their very way of life, the intimate knowledge of soil and season that was their inheritance, was being extracted, written down on vellum, and taken away to be filed in some distant, silent library. It made the knowledge feel less theirs. The monk, Brother Michael, took lodging in the priest's house. He spent days walking the fields, nodding to himself. One evening he came upon John and old Henry mending a fence near the stream. He asked about the great frost of 2 winters past. Old Henry, eager for an audience, spoke of how the ice on the stream had been so thick they had rolled a barrel across it, and how the following harvest had been poor, for the frost bit too deep and killed the goodwill of the earth. Brother Michael listened, then posed a strange question. And did you notice, Goodman, if the winter of the deep frost was longer but drier, and the poor harvest summer, was it wetter in the growing season? John and Henry looked at each other. They had not thought of it in such terms. Weather was either good or bad, a blessing or a curse from God. This parsing of it was strange, but they nodded. "Aye," John said slowly. "The frost held long, but there was little snow, and the summer the rains came late and drowned the grain." Brother Michael made a note. "It is a pattern noted by my order in other manners," he said, almost to himself. "A cycle. To them it was not a cycle. It was the unpredictable wrath and mercy of heaven." This monk's calm categorization was both fascinating and faintly heretical. As Lent gave way to Easter, and the urgent work of plowing and sowing reached its peak, the village was shaken by a different kind of visitation. A peddler arrived, his pack laden with needles, ribbons, salts, and news. And the news he brought was not of local boundaries or weather patterns, but of a world beyond their fields. He sat by the hearth in the tavern, a cottage with a slightly larger ale supply, and for the price of a cup of weak beer he told tales. Of King Edward II and his favorite, Hugh Despenser, and the grumbling of the barons. Of famine in France. Of a great battle years ago at Bannockburn where the English king was humbled by the Scots. These were distant rumblings like summer thunder beyond the hills. Then he spoke of something closer. "They say the murrain is in the cattle to the north in Lincolnshire," he said, his voice low. "A terrible thing. Beasts drop in the field, their mouths foaming, whole herds wiped out." A chill that had nothing to do with the spring evening settled over the room. Their 2 cows, Brindle and Daisy, were not just animals. They were wealth, traction, milk, and next year's calves. They were survival. The boar hunt rescue, the extra handful of seed, the careful management of winter, all of it would be for nothing if the murrain came to Wolford. The peddler's news transformed the emerging green world. Every lowing from the pasture now carried a note of dread. The villagers looked at their animals with new, anxious eyes. They used old charms, hanging branches of rowan in the byres. Agnes made a special salt lick with herbs blessed by Father Anselm. The specter of random, wholesale loss had entered their minds. They had survived the predictable, siege-like hardship of winter, but this was a capricious, invisible foe. It was Brother Michael, the surveying monk, who offered an unexpected sliver of practical advice. He had studied husbandry texts. "Isolate any new beast brought into the village for 40 days, he told Father Anselm, who passed it on. "Do not let your cattle drink from standing water where birds from the north may have landed." It was not much, but it was action. It gave them a ritual of defense against the unseen. Spring deepened into early summer. The sown fields showed thin green lines of promise. The garden plots flourished. The fear of murrain remained, but life was consumed by the sheer, exhausting effort of keeping up with the growing season. Weeding, hedging, tending. One afternoon, as John repaired the thatch on his cottage roof, he saw a rider approach on the road from the manor. It was not Folk the steward. It was a younger man in a finer cloak. He reined in before the cottage. "You are John, the tenant of the West Yard strip." "Aye, sir," John said, climbing down, his heart thudding. "I am Sir Raymond, attendant to Lord de Clare." The young man's gaze was direct but not unkind. "My lord's brother, whose horse you dealt with in the winter forest, has spoken of it. He is recovered. He is a man who values practical competence." John said nothing, waiting. The manor's head herdsman is old and failing. The position is one of trust. It comes with an extra acre of closes for pasture and a remission of 2 days' labor rent each week. Sir Raymond paused, letting the immense value of this offer sink in. It was a transformation. It was security. "My lord's brother suggests you are not a fool with beasts. Would you take it?" The air left John's lungs. He looked past the night to his own strip, to the common field where his labor was owed. He thought of the murrain, of the responsibility for the Lord's entire herd. It was a dangerous elevation. It would set him apart from his neighbors, Martin Tompkin. It would bring him closer to the eye of authority with all its perils. But the extra land, the remission of labor, the chance to insure his own cows by caring for the Lord, might be better protected. He thought of Agnes's hands, raw from scrubbing, of Emota's thin arms, of old Henry's cough, of the relentless, grinding weight of the weekly labor rent. He bowed his head, not in submission, but in acceptance of a new and terrifying current that had caught him. "Aye, sir," he said, his voice rough. "I would take it." The news spread through Wolford like the wind through barley. Some were envious. Some, like Martin, were quietly hurt, feeling a partnership broken. Tompkin clapped him on the back, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. Agnes was terrified and proud in equal measure. Their world had shifted. The long winter had been a collective trial. This new development was a personal voyage into uncharted, hierarchical waters. That night, as they lay in the alcove, the children asleep, the cows breathing softly in the dark, Agnes whispered, "Is it a blessing, John, or a snare?" John stared into the blackness, smelling the sweet, dry scent of the thatch above him. He thought of the nobleman's unconscious face in the snow, of the merciful knife on the horse's neck, of the unasked-for quarter of boar. "I don't know, wife," he whispered back, "but the winter was a snare we knew. This is something new. We survived the beast of winter. Now we must learn to live with the beasts of men." Outside, under a sky thick with stars, the crops grew silently in the dark earth. The wheel had turned, but it had not returned them to where they began. They had been tested, noticed, and changed. The struggle for survival had taken on a new, more complex form. The story of how medieval peasants endured was never just about the cold. It was about navigating the sudden, unpredictable thaws in the landscape of power, and finding a way to root their lives in soil that was always, forever, shifting beneath them. The head herdsman's cottage stood apart. It was not larger than John's old home, but it was better built, its timber sturdier, its roof rethatched with the Lord's good straw the previous year. It sat on the edge of the common pasture, close to the manor's enclosed domain fields. To Agnes, the first time she crossed its threshold with their meager belongings piled on a handcart, it felt exposed. They were no longer nestled in the protective hive of the village lane. The wind here had a clearer path, and so, she felt, did the eyes of others. The extra acre of closes, a small hedged field, was the true wealth. It meant they could keep a third cow or a flock of a dozen sheep, separate from the common flock. It meant a private patch of peas and beans, not subject to the communal grazing after harvest. It was a fingerhold on something approaching independence. But the price was immediate and isolating. John's first duty was to assess the Lord's herd, 40 sheep, a dozen cows for milk and breeding, and the 6 great, patient oxen that were the engine of the domain plow team. Old Call, the previous herdsman, was a bent figure with cloudy eyes who showed John the tracks and the favored grazing spots, his knowledge a map in his mind that was fatting. The dapple-backed cow, She's a leader but skittish near the old thorn, he mumbled. The big ox Bayard has a tender hoof after wet weather. John listened, the responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical yoke. He was now the guardian of the Lord's most mobile, most vulnerable wealth. The Murren was a shadow over everything. He inspected each beast daily, feeling for fever, checking eyes and muzzles for any sign of the dreaded foam. He enforced Brother Michael's advice with a convert's zeal, turning away a traveler's sorry nag that sought to drink at the village pond. In the village, the change was subtle but profound. At the alehouse, the conversation would dip slightly when John entered. He was still John, son of Henry, but he was also now the Lord's herdsman. His information was privileged. Did he know if the Lord planned to enclose more of the common pasture for his sheep? Would he be stricter about village geese straying onto the domain? His old ease with Martin was strained. When John was granted his 2 days of labor remission, it meant Martin had to take on a marginally larger share of their shared obligations on the Lord's land. A minute, unspoken shift in the balance of their friendship. Agnes felt it at the well where the women gathered. The gossip and laughter flowed around her slightly differently. There was a new respect, tinged with a sharp curiosity. "Will you be getting a girl to help you now with your new duties?" asked Maud, the wheelwright's wife, her voice sweetly probing. Agnes shook her head, but the question planted a seed of anxiety. Were their manners expected to change? Should she no longer patch her kirtle with a contrasting cloth? The real test came not from the village, but from the manor. Folk the steward summoned John a fortnight after his appointment. In the stone-flagged storeroom that served as his office, surrounded by the smells of tally sticks, dried herbs, and sour wine, Folk was all cold business. "The shearing," he said without preamble. "It begins next week. You will manage the gathering. The wool is to be sorted, prime fleece from the sheep's sides to one basket, the belly and taglocks to another. Not a handful is to go missing. The clippers will be here from the town. You will feed them from your portion, as is the custom for your post." It was both an order and a test. Feeding the 3 itinerant shearers, rough, skilled men who moved from manor to manor, for 2 days would consume a significant part of Agnes's carefully hoarded grain and the last of their smoked bacon. It was the hidden cost of the privilege. But it was also John's first command. The efficiency of the shearing, the quality of the sorted wool, would be a direct reflection on him. The shearing day dawned bright and warm. The shearers set up their stools in the pasture, their blades flashing. The village turned out to help, for shearing was a communal event, but now John was its conductor. He directed the boys who brought the sheep from the pen. He checked each fleece as it came off, his fingers probing for burrs or thin spots, deciding its grade. He saw Folk watching from a distance, a silent, judging silhouette. There was a moment of crisis. One of the shearers, a man with a broken nose named Hal, nicked a ewe badly on the flank. It was a shallow cut, but it bled freely onto the precious wool. "Clumsy oaf," the head shearer barked, cuffing Hal on the ear. The ewe bleated in panic. John stepped in. He took the ewe gently but firmly, calling for Agnes, who came running with her basket of remedies. While she packed the wound with cobwebs and a paste of yarrow, John addressed Hal, not with anger but with cold clarity. "The value of that fleece is docked from your pay, and you will work an extra hour tonight to make up the time." He turned to the head shearer. "Is that fair under your custom?" The man nodded, grudgingly impressed. It was fair, and it asserted John's authority without cruelty. The incident, instead of undermining him, solidified his control. The shearing proceeded smoothly. That evening, as the shearers ate their fill of Agnes's thick pottage, now enriched with a precious piece of their bacon, they spoke to John with a measure of professional respect. He was not just a peasant given a title. He had handled himself like a man of charge. When the wool was packed into great wool sacks, stamped with the Declare seal, and loaded onto a cart for the merchant from St. Ives, Folk gave a curt nod of approval. "The tally is correct." It was the highest praise John would ever receive from him. The reward, when it came, was not from Folk, but from an unexpected quarter. A week later, Sir Raymond rode down to the pasture. He did not dismount but gestured for John to approach. "My lord's brother is sending a gift, a breeding ram, from his own stock in Kent." He said it as if announcing a royal decree. "It is to improve the flock. You are to keep it separate, breed it with the best 20 ewes this autumn. The lambs will be marked for the Lord's use." The ram arrived 2 days later. It was an animal unlike any in Wolford. It was huge, its fleece a dense, creamy white, its horns great curled weapons. It moved with an arrogant, powerful grace. This was not just livestock. It was a statement of ambition, a living instrument of profit. And its care was now John's paramount duty. The ram, which John privately called the Knight, became his shadow and his obsession. It was too valuable for the common pasture. It required the best of the closes, the cleanest water. It was aggressive, challenging the fences, demanding constant vigilance. The gift was, John realized, a double-edged sword. Its success would bring credit. Its failure, sickness, theft, accident, would be a disaster far greater than any personal hardship. One night, awakened by a barking dog, John rushed out to find the Knight butting relentlessly at the wattle hurdle of his enclosure, its eyes glittering in the moonlight. It was not trying to escape. It was testing its world, asserting its dominance. John understood the impulse. He too was butting against the hurdles of his old life, testing the strength of his new position. He spoke to the ram softly as he reinforced the hurdle with a stout pole. "Easy, you great fool. We are both of us in a pen not of our making, but the hay is sweeter here, is it not?" As summer reached its lush, green peak, the village prepared for the hay harvest, the first crucial harvest of the year, securing winter fodder. John's labor remission meant he could focus on the Lord's meadow, ensuring the hay for the night and the prized animals was cut, dried, and ricked perfectly. But he also worked his own strips in the common field, the wheat and rye now standing tall, heavy with grain. The duality of his life was never clearer. One foot in the communal rhythm of the village, the other in the manorial economy. The tension broke, as it often did, not over work but over faith. The Sunday after midsummer, Father Anselm gave a sermon that seemed, to John, directed straight at him. He spoke of the parable of the talents, of the servant who was given more and was expected to produce more. He spoke of the dangers of pride, of forgetting one's station, of the camel and the eye of the needle. John sat on the hard bench, his neck burning. He felt the glances of his neighbors. Did they think him prideful? Was his careful management of the Lord's beasts a form of greed? After the service, as the villagers milled in the churchyard, old Henry approached Father Anselm, his voice loud with the confusion of age. "Father, the monk, Brother Michael, he said God's will is in the patterns of the rain and the sun. Is that not close to paganism?" A small crowd gathered. Father Anselm's face tightened. The scholarly monk's dispassionate observations had unsettled more than just John. They challenged the simpler, more terrifying cosmology of divine wrath and mercy. "The monk studies God's creation," Father Anselm said carefully. "But it is not for us to seek patterns as a merchant seeks profit. We must accept and pray." But the seed of doubt, of a world potentially governed by comprehensible cycles rather than capricious will, had been sown. It was a different kind of knowledge, and like John's new position, it created a rift between those who had it and those who did not. That evening, John found himself walking not to his new cottage, but to his old one, where Martin now lived alone since his wife's death in childbirth the previous year. He carried a small crock of Agnes's best ale. He found Martin mending a net by his door. For a long moment they sat in silence. Then John offered the crock. Martin took it, drank, and passed it back. "The ram is a fine beast," Martin said finally, not looking up from his net. "He's a bloody nuisance," John replied, and a grin cracked Martin's weathered face. The laugh broke the dam. They spoke of the hay, of the promising grain, of old Henry's cough that wouldn't leave, of the persistent fear of murrain. They did not speak of the unsaid things, the shifted obligations, the silent judgments. They didn't need to. The shared drink, the shared memory of the frozen forest and the boar's blood in the snow was enough, for now. As John walked home in the long summer twilight, the scent of hay and honeysuckle thick in the air, he understood. The winter had been a battle against a single, obvious enemy. This new life was a perpetual negotiation with his lord, his neighbors, his faith, and even with an arrogant, gifted ram. Survival was no longer just about endurance. It was about balance. And the most delicate balance of all was not losing himself, John of Wolford, in the process of becoming the Lord's herdsman. The harvest was coming. The true test of the year's labor and of John's precarious new standing still lay ahead, golden and heavy in the fields. The story of their survival was entering a new, more complex season. No, the story is not ended. The harvest, the culmination of the entire year's desperate labor and hope, looms. This is the moment of truth, not just for the crops, but for John's fragile new position, for the village's cohesion, and for the fate of every soul in Wolford. The complex web of obligation, fear, and fragile trust woven through the spring and summer is about to be tested by the scythe, the weather, and human nature. Here is the continuation. Part 4. The Reckoning of the Grain. The air in the week before Lammas Day grew thick, not just with the humid heat of high summer, but with a collective, coiled tension. The wheat in the common field turned from green to a pale, shimmering gold, the heads bowing with their own weight. In the Lord's domain fields, the stands were even taller, the product of better seed and the first turn of the rich, manured soil. Every eye scanned the sky. A hailstorm now, or a week of pounding rain, could flatten the crop, drowning a year's hope in mud. The fear of Murren was joined by the older, more intimate fear of a spoiled harvest. John's world split in two. His mind was with the Lord's grain, his responsibility, but his heart, and the muscle memory of a lifetime, was with his own strips, intermingled with Martin's and Tompkins and a dozen others in the open field. The harvest required every hand, from the oldest child who could bind sheaves to the most bent elder who could scare birds. It was a time of absolute communal effort, where old grievances were, by necessity, set aside. The manor court convened for the harvestreves' meeting. Folk stood before them, his voice carrying across the anxious crowd. The rules were proclaimed, ancient and severe. No one was to begin reaping until the manorial horn sounded at dawn on the appointed day. Gleaning, the collecting of fallen stalks, was forbidden until the Lord's harvesters had finished, and the furlong was declared open. The punishment for stealing sheaves was a fine that would break a family, or worse. Then came the assignments. Because of his post, John was appointed a maker, a foreman of a harvesting team on the domain. His team included Martin, Tompkin, and 3 others. It was folks' clever, unspoken diplomacy, binding John's old loyalties to his new duty. John felt the weight of it. Their speed and efficiency would be measured against other teams. Their pay, in extra grain and a harvest feast portion, depended on it. The night before the harvest began, a different kind of visitor came to John's cottage. It was old Mag, the wise woman from the forest edge. She rarely came to the village proper. She carried a basket of strange, fragrant herbs. "For the ram," she said, her voice a dry rustle, "steep these in his water, it will calm his blood for the breeding season." She fixed John with her milky, seeing eyes. "And for you, the weight you carry is not just on your back, it is here." She tapped her own temple. "The land knows its steward, be fair, and it will be fair to you." It was neither Christian blessing nor pagan curse, but a piece of earthy wisdom from a source older than the manor. John took the herbs, feeling a strange comfort. He was navigating between the cold ledger of folk, the distant grace of God via Father Anselm, and now the deep folk knowledge of Mag. A peasant's mind had room for all 3. The horn sounded in the gray pre-dawn. The harvest began. It was a battle. Men and women moved in a staggered line, scythes swinging in a deadly, rhythmic swish-thump. The sun rose and hammered down upon them. Sweat-stung eyes and soaked tunics. Children followed, gathering the fallen stalks into bundles for the binders, who worked with frantic speed, tying sheaves with twisted straw bands. The dust of chaff and dry earth filled the air, coating lungs and skin in a gritty film. John worked alongside his team, but his eyes were everywhere. He coordinated the shockers, those who stacked the sheaves into stooks to dry. He kept the pace brisk but sustainable. When young End, Tompkins' nephew, flagged under the sun, John silently swapped places with him, taking the heavier work of shocking without a word. It was noticed. On the domain, the atmosphere was more severe. The Lord's steward and bailiffs watched, tallying the progress of each team. Here, the sheaves were carted directly to the manor's tithe barn, a great stone-built fortress of wealth. The sight of that bounty, so clearly measured and removed, was a perpetual, gentle agony. After 3 days of backbreaking labor on the domain, the communal village harvest began. Here, the spirit was different. The strips were narrow, the work more personal. As they reaped John's strip, then Martin's, then Tompkins, it was a direct translation of sweat into survival. The sheaves were theirs. Agnes and the other women brought out ale and bread, a moment of shared respite in the shade of a hedgerow. There was laughter, even song, a ragged, rhythmic chant to keep the scythes moving. It was during the harvest of his own strip that John saw it. A movement in the stand of wheat next to his, a strip rented by a widow, Sissy, a fox, a dog. Then he saw a flash of dull color, a cloak. Someone was in the standing grain, not reaping but moving stealthily. A poacher of a different kind, a grain thief, stealing sheaves before the cutting even reached that furlong. Anger, hot and immediate, flared in John's chest. This was not gleaning. This was robbery from a widow, from the community's collective bowl. He gestured silently to Tompkin, who nodded. They broke from the line, moving to flank the intruder. They crashed into the standing wheat and found him. A man they didn't know, gaunt and wild-eyed, with a sack already half full of roughly cut heads. A stranger, likely from a village where the harvest had failed. "Thief!" Tompkin roared, grabbing the man's arm. The man struggled, desperate. "My children are hollow," he spat. "The rain rotted ours." John felt the man's bony wrist in his grip. He saw the terror, the hunger deeper than any law. This was the other side of their fear, not nature's caprice but human desperation. He thought of the boar meat shared. He thought of the hungry gap. "Take the sack," John said to Tompkin, his voice low. Then to the stranger, "If I see you again, I will bring the steward, and he will hang you from the oak as a warning. Now go, and if your harvest failed, seek the monastery for alms, not the edge of another man's scythe." The man stared, disbelief then desperate gratitude flooding his face. He fled into the forest, leaving his ill-gotten gains. Tompkin looked at John, questioning. "We should have taken him to Folk." "And add another ghost to the forest," John said, emptying the stolen grain into his own harvest basket. "It would be added to the common yield unremarked. Hunger makes a thief of any man. We have enough. Today we do." Tompkin nodded slowly. It was justice, but not the manor's justice. It was the older village law of measured mercy. The harvest days blurred into one long ache of muscle and sun. Finally, the last sheaf on the last strip was cut. The harvest queen was woven with poppies and carried by the village girls to the church with a ragged cheer. The great work was done. The grain was in sheaves but not yet safe. It had to dry in the stooks, then be carted and stored before the autumn rains. The harvest feast on the domain was a lavish affair of release. The Lord provided ale, and there was a stew made with meat, real, fresh mutton. There was music from a traveling piper. For a few hours the hierarchy softened. John sat with his team, who toasted him as a fair maker. Even folk acknowledged him with a raised cup. John felt a surge of pride quickly tempered by exhaustion. But the true feast, the meaningful one, was in the village that Sunday. Each family contributed to a shared table on the green. There was laughter, dancing. Agnes wore a new ribbon in her hair. John saw Martin sharing a joke with widow Sissy, and a new, tentative warmth between them. The community, strained by John's rise and the pressures of the year, was knitting itself back together around the shared triumph of the gathered grain. It was during this feast that Brother Michael, the surveying monk, found John. His work was done. He was returning to St. Albans. "I have finished my compotus of Wolford," he said. "Your yield, by my estimation, is 12% better than the average of the last 10 years. A good year." John nodded, unsure what to say to this numerical summary of their sweat and fear. "The ram," Brother Michael added, his eyes sharp. "It represents a change. The Lord seeks more wool, finer wool for the Flemish markets. This," he gestured at the feasting villagers at the stooks standing sentinel in the shorn fields, "this way of life, the open field, the common rights, it is good for growing food for men. It is less good for growing wealth for lords. The ram is the first step. Remember that." With those ominous, prophetic words, the monk mounted his donkey and left, taking his parchments and his patterns with him. The words chilled John long after the monk had gone. He looked at the night, penned nearby, a symbol of a future John could barely comprehend. He looked at his sleeping children, their bellies full for once. He looked at the stars beginning to prick the deep blue sky above the familiar, beloved outline of the fields. The harvest was in. They had survived the winter, navigated the spring, endured the summer. The granaries would be filled, the pot would be thick, the winter would be faced with fuller bellies and a measure of security. But as he stood there, the sounds of revelry behind him, John understood with a cold clarity. The most dangerous seasons were not always the hardest. The true threat might not be the white beast of winter, but the slow, inexorable change heralded by a superior ram and the distant demands of Flemish weavers. They had won the year's battle, but the war for their very way of life, a war they did not yet know they were fighting, was just beginning. The wheel would turn again to autumn, to slaughter, to preparation. But the world it turned in was no longer quite the same. And John, the Lord's herdsman, balanced precariously between two worlds, would be on the front line of whatever was to come. The autumn after the great harvest was a season of profound, deceptive contentment. The barns, both the manor's great stone tithe barn and the smaller, wattle and daub structures behind every cottage, swelled with grain. The air smelled of applewood smoke and the sweet, decaying richness of fallen leaves. The slaughter month brought a sense of secure abundance. They salted and smoked not from the desperate calculus of starvation, but with the measured confidence of those who had met the land's challenge and won. Yet in John's cottage and in his mind the contentment was laced with the lingering chill of Brother Michael's warning. The ram, the night, had been put to the selected ewes with arrogant efficiency. The deed done, the animal's restless energy seemed to diminish, as if satisfied with its legacy. But the legacy was the question. Those lambs born next spring would not be village lambs. They would be the Lord's improved flock, requiring better pasture, perhaps more of the common land. John's new role settled into a routine. He was respected, if still slightly set apart. He mediated a dispute between two families over a strayed pig with a fairness that drew nods from folk who was beginning to trust his judgment. He found a rhythm with Agnes, where the extra food from their closes meant her face lost its pinched look, and little Emota's laughter came more easily. Old Henry, though his cough persisted, spent hours in the autumn sun, carving a beautiful, intricate yoke pin for John, his gnarled hands still capable of creation. The equilibrium felt ancient, stable. It was broken not by a dramatic event, but by a quiet conversation. Sir Geoffrey de Clare, the Lord himself, came to Wolford. It was a rare occurrence. He did not stay at the modest manor house, but was passing through on a journey to London, attended by a retinue that made the courtyard seem small. He was a man in his prime, with a sharp, assessing gaze that missed nothing. After inspecting the granaries and the stored wool, he sent for John. John stood before him in the hall, the smell of roasting meat and expensive wax candles heavy in the air. Sir Geoffrey did not offer a seat. "Your steward and my brother speak well of your management," Sir Geoffrey began, his voice cool. "The harvest was satisfactory. The ram is healthy." "Thank you, my lord." John kept his eyes lowered but his spine straight. "The world beyond this village is changing, herdsman." Sir Geoffrey took a sip of wine. The king's wars require taxes. Taxes require money. Money comes from wool. The finest wool comes from flocks like the one you are now fostering. He set down his goblet. This system, he waved a hand, presumably encompassing the open fields, the common rights, is for sustenance. I require growth. John's heart began a slow, heavy thud. He said nothing. Next spring, Sir Geoffrey continued, as if discussing the weather, the furlong along the stream, the one you call Long Meadow, will be enclosed. It will become permanent pasture for the new flock. The strips there will be compensated with a reduction in labor rent for those who hold them. It was a thunderclap in a quiet room. Long Meadow was some of the best, most fertile land in the open field. Its loss would reduce the village's grain yield significantly. A reduction in labor rent was a cold exchange. It gave time, but time could not bake bread from missing grain. It was a step, the first concrete step toward what Brother Michael had foreseen. The Lord was shifting from collecting shares of a communal harvest to maximizing his own, separate, commercial wealth. You will oversee the enclosure, Sir Geoffrey said. It was not a request. See that the hedges are properly laid. It is a sign of my trust. It was also making John the instrument of the change, the man who would fence his neighbors out of their ancestral land. The weight of it crushed the air from his lungs. My lord, John said, the words escaping before he could stop them. The villagers, they depend on that furlong's yield. Sir Geoffrey's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in pure, patronizing astonishment. And they shall have more time to tend their remaining strips. Efficiency, herdsman, progress. You are a practical man, you see the sense. Dismissed, John stumbled out into the crisp autumn air. The sense was a trap. He saw it with perfect clarity. The Lord saw fields and sheep and profit. John saw Martin's strip in Long Meadow, which had been his father's before him. He saw Widow Sissy's narrow plot, her sole inheritance. He saw the delicate balance of the whole system, about to be kicked like a fragile stook. He did not go home. He walked to the churchyard and stood before the yew tree, its berries blood-red in the fatting light. He thought of the winter forest, of the shared danger that had bound them. He thought of the grain thief and the mercy that felt right. This was different. This was not mercy or cruelty, but a slow, legal, unstoppable grinding. That evening he told Agnes. She listened, her hands stilling in her wool carding. Her face, which had softened with better food, grew hard and ancient. You cannot refuse him, she said, her voice flat. It was not a question. No. Then you must be the one who lays the hedge, she said, her eyes meeting his, fierce and full of a painful wisdom. You must lay it so that it is strong but fair, so that birds can nest and the rabbits have a burrow, so that it is a good hedge. If the thing must be done, let your hand do it with care, not with the steward's whip at your back. Her words were his absolution and his burden. The following week, when folk made the announcement at the manor court, the silence was colder than any winter frost. Eyes turned to John, not with anger yet, but with a betrayed, bewildered hurt. Martin looked away. Tompkins' face was a stony mask. The enclosure began on a morning glittering with the first true frost. John, with a crew of laborers paid from the manor, started marking the boundary. They cut saplings, dug ditches, began weaving the living hawthorn and blackthorn into a barrier that would live for centuries. As he worked, his hands bleeding from the thorns, John felt every cut as a betrayal. He saw villagers working their distant strips, pausing to watch the progress of the hedge, a new, hard line scarring their communal world. Only old Henry came to speak to him. The old man leaned on his stick, watching John weave a stubborn branch. My father saw an enclosure, Henry said, his voice phlegmy. Over at Weston, there was a riot, men were hanged. He spat into the ditch. This way is quieter, but the fence is just as high. He placed a gnarled hand on John's shoulder for a moment, a shock of warmth and understanding, then shuffled away. The work continued as autumn deepened toward winter. The hedge grew, a dark, thorny serpent across the beloved field. The village's silence toward John thawed slowly, reluctantly, into a tense acceptance. They saw him working harder than any laborer, saw the care he took, saw him argue with folk to leave a corner of the meadow open for access to the stream. He was their betrayer, but he was also their buffer. On the day the first snow flurries danced in the air, John stood back from the completed hedge. It was, as Agnes had demanded, a good hedge. Strong, thick, alive. It would shelter birds and small beasts. It would mark a boundary for generations. He hated it. That night the village gathered for the slaughter feast. The mood was subdued, the shadow of the new hedge lying over them despite the ale and the smell of fresh pork. But as the fire crackled, a strange thing happened. Martin, his face solemn, walked over to John and placed a wooden cup of ale before him. It was not a smile, not forgiveness, but an acknowledgement. They were all, in different ways, trapped by the same changing world. John had become its reluctant warden, but he was still of them. John took the cup and drank. The ale was bitter and strong. Later, standing at his door, looking out at the white fields under a starry sky, John felt the familiar, ancient siege of winter closing in once more. But this year, the enemy outside the walls was not just the cold. It was the future itself, a future of more sheep, more enclosures, more silent, thorny hedges creeping across the land. He had helped his people survive one kind of death. Now, he wondered if his duty was to help them navigate the slow death of their world. He thought of the night, warm in its byre, its legacy growing in the wombs of the ewes. He thought of the first green shoot he would look for come spring, not in the common field, but pushing through near the new hedge, life stubbornly asserting itself against new boundaries. The story of how medieval peasants survived did not have a neat ending. It was a cycle of endurance, adaptation, and perpetual loss. They had survived the winter. They would survive this change too, but they would be diminished by it. And John, the herdsman, would stand on the border between what was and what would be, his loyalties as tangled and strong as the thorns in the hedge he had built with his own bleeding hands. The siege was eternal. Only the face of the enemy changed. Good evening. This is boring history for sleep. Tonight we're talking about small towns in America. During the 1800s, nothing exciting will happen. Nothing important will change. Everything is slow. Everything is quiet. Everything is ordinary. You do not need to remember anything. You do not need to stay awake. Just listen and rest. Imagine a small town. Not a big town. Not a city. Just a small town. The town has one main street. Only one. The street is made of dirt. Not pavement. Not stone. Just dirt. When the weather is dry, the dirt becomes dust. The dust rises slowly. When a wagon passes by. When the weather is wet, the dirt becomes mud. The mud sticks to boots. The mud sticks to wagon wheels. This is normal. This happens every year. The buildings along the street are simple, very simple. Most buildings are made of wood. The wood is plain. Some buildings are painted white. Some are painted light brown. Some are gray. The paint is faded. It has been faded for many years. No one is in a hurry to repaint. There is a general store. Every small town has one. The general store sells many things. It sells flour. It sells sugar. It sells salt. It sells coffee beans. Not ground coffee. Just beans. It sells nails. It sells fabric. The fabric is folded carefully. The fabric smells faintly of dust. And wood. Inside the general store, the floor creaks. It creaks every time someone walks. The same boards creak. Every day. The shopkeeper knows which boards make noise. He steps on them anyway. Next to the general store is the blacksmith shop. The blacksmith shop is darker. It smells like metal. It smells like smoke. Inside, the blacksmith works slowly. He heats metal. He waits. He shapes the metal. He waits again. The sound of hammer on metal is steady. It is not loud. It is not fast. It is the same sound, over and over. Further down the street is a small church. The church is plain, very plain. There are no decorations. Inside the church, there are wooden benches. They are hard. They are smooth from years of use. People sit quietly on Sundays. They listen. They go home. Near the church is a small schoolhouse. Just one room. One teacher. Many children. Different ages. The schoolhouse looks the same. Every year. At the edge of town. The buildings stop. There are fewer houses. Then there are fields. Then there are trees. The trees move slowly. In the wind. They have always been there. The town does not change much. One year looks like the next. One day feels like the one before. People know what to expect. They like it that way. Wagons pass through town. Not many. Just a few. The wheels turn slowly. The horses walk patiently. No one rushes the horses. There is no reason to rush. People walk more than they ride. They walk to the store. They walk to church. They walk to visit neighbors. They stop to talk. They talk about the weather. They talk about crops. They talk about nothing important. Time moves slowly here. Very slowly. There are no loud machines. There are no flashing lights. There is no constant noise. Just quiet. Just routine. Just another ordinary day. In a small town. In the 1800s. You can imagine the town staying this way. Still, calm, unchanged. And as the town rests, you can rest too. Good evening. This is boring history for sleep. We are still in the same small town. In America, during the 1800s, nothing has changed. The town is quiet. Now it is early morning. Morning begins slowly. Very slowly. There are no alarm clocks. There are no ringing bells. People wake up. When the light comes through the window, they wake up. When the sky becomes pale, roosters begin to crow. They crow every morning. They crow at nearly the same time. Dogs stretch. Dogs yawn. Dogs do not hurry. Inside the houses, people begin to wake. They sit up. They stand. They move carefully. The floor is cold. The air is cool. Fires must be started. This takes time. Wood is placed in the hearth. A match is struck. The fire catches slowly. There is no rush. Water must be carried. Buckets are filled. Buckets are heavy. Water sloshes gently. As people walk. This is part of the morning. It always has been. Breakfast is simple. Very simple. Bread. Porridge. Sometimes eggs. Sometimes not. Food is eaten quietly. People chew slowly. There is not much talking. Children get ready for the day. They wash their faces. They put on simple clothes. The clothes are plain. They have been worn many times. Outside, smoke begins to rise from chimneys. The smoke drifts upward. It moves slowly. The town smells faintly of wood smoke. This smell fills the air. Every morning, the general store remains closed. The door is locked. The windows are dark. It will open later. There is no need to hurry. A farmer walks past a house. He leads a horse. The horse walks calmly. The farmer does not pull. The horse knows the way. Wagon wheels creak softly. Not many wagons pass. Just a few. Each one moves slowly. Birds begin to sing. They sing without hurry. They sing from trees. They sing from fences. Their sounds are gentle. The sun rises higher. Light spreads across the town. Shadows move. They move quietly. People begin their work. Not all at once. One by one. A door opens. Another door opens. Footsteps appear on the street. The blacksmith arrives at his shop. He unlocks the door. He steps inside. He does this every morning. The same way. The shopkeeper arrives at the general store. He unlocks the door. He sweeps the floor. The same boards creak. They always creak. Children begin walking to school. They walk together. They walk slowly. They talk softly. Sometimes they do not talk at all. The schoolhouse door opens. The teacher waits inside. The day begins. The town is now awake. But it is still quiet. There is no loud noise. There is no rush. Just slow movement. Just routine. Morning passes gently. Like it always does. Like it always will. You can imagine. This morning lasting a long time. Stretching out. Moving slowly. And as the town continues its calm routine, you can continue to rest. Good evening. This is boring history for sleep. We are still in the same small town. In America, during the 1800s, the morning has already begun. Now people are working. Slowly. Work in the town is steady. It is not fast. It is not exciting. It is the same work. Done every day. The blacksmith lights his fire. He waits. The fire grows hotter. He waits again. Metal is placed in the heat. It changes slowly. Nothing happens quickly. He lifts the metal. He places it on the anvil. He lifts his hammer. He strikes. The sound is calm. The sound is familiar. Hammer. Pause. Hammer. Pause. The blacksmith wipes his hands. He takes his time. There is no reason to rush. Inside the general store, the shopkeeper arranges items. He lifts sacks of flour. He sets them down. He straightens jars. He checks his shelves. The store smells of wood. It smells of cloth. It smells of dry goods. The door opens. A customer enters. They greet each other quietly. Flour is measured. Sugar is weighed. Fabric is unrolled. Everything is done carefully. Everything is done slowly. Outside, farmers move through fields. They walk behind plows. The soil turns over. The sound is soft. The movement is steady. Horses pull. Horses stop. Horses wait. No one shouts. No one rushes. Chickens wander near fences. They peck at the ground. They move a few steps. Then they stop. Then they move again. Children sit in the schoolhouse. They sit on wooden benches. They open books. They listen. The teacher speaks slowly. Words are read aloud. Letters are written on a slate. Mistakes are erased. Lessons continue. The schoolroom is quiet. Only small sounds. Pages turning. Feet shifting. A cough, then quiet again. In homes, some people sew. Needles move in and out. Thread slides through fabric. The motion is slow. The motion repeats. Others chop wood. A swing. A strike. The wood splits. The pieces are stacked. Carefully. Time passes. No one counts the minutes. There is no clock watching. The sun moves across the sky. People pause to drink water. They rest in the shade. They wipe their faces. Then they continue. The town hums quietly. Not loudly. Not constantly. Just enough to show that life is moving. Every task feels familiar. Every motion has been done before. Nothing surprises anyone. Morning slowly becomes late morning. The work continues. The same work. The same pace. The town remains calm. Predictable. Unchanging. You can imagine the steady rhythm of work continuing. The same sounds. The same movements. And as the town keeps working, you can continue to rest. Good evening. This is boring history for sleep. We are still in the same small town. In America, during the 1800s, the morning continues. Nothing sudden happens. The sun rises higher. Light becomes brighter. Shadows grow shorter. This happens every day. Work continues. At the same pace. The same slow pace. No one changes their routine. In the fields, farmers pause. They straighten their backs. They look at the sky. They wipe their hands. Then they continue. The horses stand quietly. They flick their tails. They breathe slowly. They wait. In the town, footsteps move along the street. Not many, just a few. Each step is unhurried. Inside the general store, customers come and go. One at a time. Never many at once. The shopkeeper speaks softly. He measures goods. He wraps them carefully. He nods. The door opens. The door closes. The bell makes a soft sound. The same sound. Every time. The blacksmith rests. He drinks water. He sits for a moment. Then he stands again. The forge cools slightly. Then it heats again. The cycle repeats. Children in the schoolhouse grow quiet. They listen. They write. They wait for the lesson to end. The teacher glances at the window. Light moves across the floor. Time passes. In homes, people prepare for the midday meal. Not a large meal. Just something simple. Vegetables are cut. Bread is sliced. Pots are placed on the fire. The smell of food drifts through the air. It is faint. It is familiar. Outside, the town seems to slow even more. Movement becomes less. Sounds become softer. Birds sit quietly. Insects hum gently. Leaves barely move. The sun reaches its highest point. Midday approaches. Some people return home. Others rest where they are. They sit. They breathe. They wait. No one checks the time. They feel it instead. The town settles into stillness. Not sleep. Just rest. Everything pauses. Just for a while. You can imagine the town holding still. The same calm. The same quiet. And as the town rests, you can rest too. Good evening. This is boring history for sleep. We are still in the same small town. In America, during the 1800s, it is now midday. The sun sits high in the sky. Light is strong. Heat settles gently. Work slows, not because it stops, but because bodies rest. People eat a small meal. They sit. They chew slowly. They drink water. There is not much talking, just quiet movement, just simple sounds. After eating, people remain still. Some sit on porches. Some sit under trees. They lean back. They close their eyes. They breathe. The town becomes quieter, even quieter than before. Animals rest. Horses lower their heads. Dogs lie in the shade. Chickens stop moving. In the fields, tools are set down. Hands rest. Feet remain still. Inside houses, windows are open. Curtains move gently. Air drifts through rooms. The smell of food fades. The smell of warm earth remains. Time stretches. Minutes feel long. Hours move slowly. No bells ring. No signals sound. People know when to return. The street is nearly empty. A single wagon passes. The wheels turn slowly. Then it is gone. Leaves barely move. Insects hum quietly. The town seems to pause. This pause lasts. It always does. Eventually, people begin to move again. Just a little. Someone stands. Someone stretches. Someone steps back into the sun. The afternoon begins. Slowly, very slowly. Work will return. But not yet. For now, the town remains calm. Still, resting. You can imagine this quiet midday, lasting a long time. A peaceful pause. And as the town remains still, you can remain still too. Good evening. This is boring history for sleep. We are still in the same small town. In America, during the 1800s, midday has passed. Now the afternoon begins. Movement returns slowly. Very slowly. No one rushes. No one hurries. A person stands. They stretch. They adjust their clothes. They take a breath. In the fields, farmers pick up their tools. They grip them lightly. They begin again. The soil is warm. The sun is steady. Work continues. Horses are guided forward. They walk patiently. They know the routine. In town, the general store door opens again. The bell sounds softly. The same sound as always. A customer steps inside. Then another. Never many. The shopkeeper speaks calmly. He weighs goods. He wraps them. He waits. The blacksmith returns to his forge. He adds wood to the fire. He waits for heat. Metal warms. Metal changes slowly. Nothing is forced. Children leave the schoolhouse. They walk home. They talk quietly. Sometimes they are silent. In homes, people return to small tasks. Sweeping. Mending. Sorting. Hands move. Pause. Move again. The afternoon light changes. It becomes softer. Shadows grow longer. The town hums gently. Not loudly. Just enough. A wagon passes. Dust rises. Then settles. Neighbors greet each other. Short words. Small nods. Nothing more. Time moves. No one watches it. The afternoon continues. Steady, unremarkable. Nothing unusual happens. Nothing memorable occurs. The town remains predictable, calm, familiar. You can imagine this slow afternoon, stretching onward, the same motions, the same sounds, and as the town moves gently forward, you can continue to drift and rest. Good evening. This is boring history for sleep. We are still in the same small town, in America, during the 1800s. The afternoon continues. The day begins to slow. The sun lowers in the sky. Light becomes warmer. Shadows stretch longer. Work begins to wind down. Not suddenly, gradually. In the fields, farmers take fewer steps. They pause more often. They look toward home. Tools are cleaned. Tools are set aside. Hands relax. Horses are unhitched. They are led to water. They drink quietly. In town, shops begin to prepare to close. Not yet, but soon. The general store grows quieter. Fewer customers enter. The bell rings less often. The shopkeeper straightens shelves. He counts small things. He moves slowly. The blacksmith cools his tools. He wipes his hands. He rests. Children return home. They sit. They listen. They wait for supper. In homes, evening meals begin to take shape. Vegetables are gathered. Bread is sliced. Pots are placed on the fire. The smell of food drifts through the town. Soft, familiar. Neighbors pass one another. They exchange nods. Few words. The street grows calmer. Fewer footsteps. Less movement. Birds settle. Insects soften their sound. Leaves barely move. The sun sinks lower. Light fades gently. Work ends without announcement. People simply stop. They turn toward home. They walk slowly. The town feels heavy with quiet. Not sleep. Just calm. You can imagine this late afternoon, stretching gently into evening. The same calm. The same routine. And as the town prepares to rest, you can continue to relax. Good evening. This is boring history for sleep. We are still in the same small town, in America, during the 1800s. Evening has arrived. The sun slips lower. The sky grows soft. Light fades slowly. People gather inside. Doors close gently. Boots are set aside. Fires are built again. Wood is placed carefully. Flames grow slowly. Supper is prepared. Simple food. Familiar food. Soup simmers. Bread is broken. Plates are set. Families sit together. They eat slowly. They chew. They pause. Conversation is quiet. Sometimes there is none. Just the sound of eating. Outside, the street grows empty. Few people pass. Windows glow softly. Lamp light appears. One by one. Oil lamps are lit. Wicks are trimmed. Light is steady. The town becomes dim. Shadows settle. After supper, people remain seated. They rest. Some mend clothing. Needles move slowly. Thread passes through cloth. Some read. Words are spoken aloud. Pages turn gently. Children grow tired. They yawn. They lean. Outside, the air cools. Crickets begin their sound. The town feels smaller now, quieter. Nothing important happens. Nothing unexpected. This evening is like all others. Predictable. Calm. You can imagine. This soft evening. Continuing. Lamplight glowing. Voices fading. And as the town settles further, you can continue to drift. And rest. Good evening. This is boring history for sleep. We are still in the same small town. In America, during the 1800s, night has arrived. The sky darkens. Colors fade. Stars appear slowly. Lamplight becomes more important. Rooms glow softly. People speak less. Movements slow. Chairs are pushed back. Plates are cleared. The day feels finished. Some people step outside. They look at the sky. They breathe the cool air. The street is quiet. Almost empty. Doors close. Latches click softly. Inside homes, lamps are dimmed. Wicks are turned down. Light softens. People wash their hands. They change clothes. They prepare for bed. Beds are simple. Mattresses are firm. Blankets are plain. Children are tucked in. They settle. They stop moving. Adults sit quietly. They reflect. Or they do nothing. Outside, crickets continue. Owls call in the distance. The town rests. Not fully asleep yet, but close. No wagons pass. No tools sound. The night feels steady. Predictable. Time stretches. Moments blend together. The town breathes slowly. In. Out. Everything is calm. Nothing stirs. You can imagine. This night. Deepening. Lights fading. Sounds softening. And as the town prepares for sleep, you can prepare too. You can prepare too. Good evening. This is boring history for sleep. We have reached the end of the day. In the same small town. In America. During the 1800s. Inside the last home. The last lamp is turned down. A hand turns the key. The flame shrinks. It flickers once. Then it is gone. Darkness fills the room. A comfortable darkness. A familiar darkness. A window is left open a little. Cool air drifts in. It moves the curtain. Just a little. Then the curtain is still. In the bed, a breath is drawn in. It is released slowly. The mattress shifts slightly. Then there is no more movement. Outside, the last waking creature settles. A dog circles 3 times in the dust. It lies down. It rests its head on its paws. Its eyes close. The church steeple is a dark shape. Against a darker sky. It points upward. It does not move. It has not moved for years. The general store is silent. The counter is clean. The scales are still. The jars of beans and rice sit in perfect rows. They will sit there all night. Nothing will disturb them. The blacksmith's forge is cold. The anvil is cool to the touch. The tools hang on their pegs. They will hang there until morning. There is no hurry. The schoolhouse is empty. The slate is wiped clean. The benches are aligned. Dust motes, stirred by the last child's departure, have settled back to the floor. They will not move again until tomorrow. The wind, what little there is, grows softer. It does not whistle. It does not howl. It merely brushes the tops of the trees. At the edge of town, a gentle, soundless brushing. The stars do not twinkle fiercely. They are steady points of faint light. They have seen this town sleep 1,000 times. They are not surprised. They are not interested. They are just there. Time, which moved slowly all day, now ceases to matter altogether. An hour is the same as a minute. Midnight is the same as 3 o'clock. Nothing is measured. Nothing is counted. The town is not dreaming. It is simply being. A collection of wood and dirt and quiet life. Resting under the sky. There is no story left to tell. Nothing to remember. No event to mark this night as different from any other. It is just a small town, asleep in the 1800s. And as the town is finally, fully at rest, you can let go of the last thread of the day. You can release the gentle images of dust and wood smoke and fading light. There is nothing more to imagine, nothing more to follow, just the soft, deep quiet of a past that is peaceful, ordinary, and complete. Sleep well.